There is a hill in northern Israel called Megiddo. If you stand on top of it and dig straight down, you pass through 29 different civilizations, each one built on top of the last, each one certain they were the rightful owners of this land, and every single one of them wrong about who came before them. For thousands of years, the story of this land has been told through religion, through politics, through war. Jews say their ancestors built this land. Arabs say their ancestors never left. And the whole world has been arguing about who is right. But in 2020, a laboratory in Cambridge, England did something that changed everything. They read the DNA of the people buried in this ground. Not history, not scripture, not tradition. The actual chemical code locked inside 3,000-year-old human teeth. And what they found did not match anyone's story. Professor David Reich is a geneticist at Harvard Medical School in the United States. His laboratory has sequenced more ancient human genomes than any other team on Earth. When his team analyzed the DNA from 93 ancient skeletons buried across Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon, the results were not what the world expected. The bones were not clearly Jewish. They were not clearly Arab. They carried a genetic signature that belonged to both groups and to something even older than either. So here is the question that this entire video is going to answer. What if everything you were taught about who owns this land, who belongs here, and who came first, was built on a story that the actual DNA refuses to confirm? And the most disturbing part? The answer was sitting in the teeth of people who died 3,000 years ago, waiting for someone to finally ask. Before we go further, drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? Have you ever taken a DNA ancestry test? Because what we are about to show you might make you look at your own results in a completely different way. If you are someone who loves hidden histories and ancient DNA mysteries, subscribe, because this channel goes where the textbooks are afraid to go. Now, to understand what those bones revealed, we first have to meet the people who lived in this land before history even had a name for them. And their story begins with a cave. That cave. In a small village in northern Israel called Pekiyin, researchers discovered a 6,500-year-old burial site. Inside, they found 22 skeletons, men, women, and children, all buried with pottery, tools, and jewelry. Signs of a sophisticated, organized community. A joint team from Tel Aviv University and Harvard University, led by Dr. Hila May, Professor Israel Hershkovitz, and Professor David Reich, ran a full DNA analysis on these skeletons. It became the largest ancient DNA study ever done from a single site in the Near East at that time. What they found inside the bones completely changed our picture of who was living here thousands of years ago. These people were the Canaanites. Now, most people know that name only from religious texts, where the Canaanites are described as enemies, as people to be defeated. But the DNA tells a completely different story. The Canaanites were not primitive. They were not savages. They had cities. Much that they had trade routes stretching from Egypt to Greece. They had art, writing, and a culture that lasted for over 2,000 years. And their DNA shows they were a mixture of two ancient migrant groups, farmers from Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, and herders from the Zagros Mountains in western Iran, who had been mixing in this land for thousands of years before the first biblical story was ever written. But here is where things get genuinely uncomfortable. When researchers compared the Canaanite genome to modern populations, they found something that no political leader on either side of this conflict has ever publicly acknowledged. Professor David Reich stated clearly that the study shows a deep genetic connection between many modern Jewish groups and many modern Arab groups to the same Canaanite population from thousands of years ago. Let that sink in. The people who are fighting over this land today are descended from the same people. The genetic distance between a modern Israeli Jew and a modern Palestinian Arab is smaller than the genetic distance between a Spaniard and a Portuguese person. And the most extraordinary part? This is not a political opinion. This is data from bones. But the Canaanites themselves were not the original people of this land either. They were already a mixture. And finding out what they mixed with, that is where the real shock begins. Professor Liran Carmel is a molecular evolutionist at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, right in the heart of Israel. He co-led one of the most detailed Canaanite DNA studies ever published in the journal Cell. And when his team broke down the Canaanite genome completely, they found something that stopped them cold. The Canaanites were not just a product of local Levantine history. They carried a second genetic layer, a strong signal tracing all the way back to the Caucasus Mountains. And that is the mountain range between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, modern-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. People from those mountains had walked all the way down into the Middle East, thousands of years before the Bronze Age, and mixed with the local farming communities of the ancient Levant. That combination produced the Canaanites, and the proof of that migration is not just in the ancient skeletons. It is in the living people of this region today. Dr. Mark Haber is a geneticist at the Wellcome Sanger Institute in the United Kingdom. His team tested the DNA of modern Lebanese people, Muslims, Christians, and Druze, and found that all three communities carry over 90% Canaanite DNA. Over 90%. Groups that have been divided by religion and politics for centuries are, at the genomic level, the same ancient Canaanite people. The religious and political walls humans build between themselves are not written in their biology. One, think about that for a moment. Ancient trade routes from the Caucasus brought not just goods, but people. Their bloodlines flowed south and became part of the foundation of what we now call the Middle East. And that foundation, that deep Canaanite root, still runs through everyone living in this region today. But then, something happened, something so catastrophic, so total, that it did not just destroy civilizations. It rewrote the DNA of this entire region, and it came from the sea. In the year 1200 BCE, in the space of less than 100 years, every major civilization in the ancient world collapsed. The Mycenaean Greeks, gone. The Hittite Empire, destroyed. Egypt, weakened beyond recovery. The Canaanite city-states, burned to the ground. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. It is the greatest civilizational breakdown in recorded history. And at the center of it was a group of people that ancient Egyptian records called simply the Sea Peoples. For 3,000 years, nobody knew where the Sea Peoples came from until DNA answered that question. Ancient DNA extracted from burial sites at Ashkelon, a coastal city in modern Israel, directly mentioned in the Bible as a Philistine city, revealed something that stunned the scientific world. The Philistines, the biblical enemies of Israel, the people of Goliath, were genetically European. Their DNA carried clear ancestry from the Aegean world, from the direction of Greece, the Greek islands, Jew and Southern Europe. Professor David Reich's laboratory at Harvard contributed to the analysis of the Ashkelon ancient DNA. The findings confirmed that admixture from European ancestry populations entered the southern Levant during this exact period of Bronze Age collapse. But here is the part that makes this deeply personal for this story. Within 2 to 3 generations of arriving in Canaan, the European genetic signal of the Philistines began fading. They were absorbing the local Canaanite population around them, marrying, mixing. Their children were half European, half Canaanite. Their grandchildren, mostly Canaanite. And today, traces of that European DNA from the Philistines are detectable inside the modern Israeli genome. The enemy's blood is inside the descendant's body. The idea that any people in this region has a pure, unmixed, unbroken ancestral line is not supported by a single study. Not one. But the Bronze Age collapse did not just bring new people in. It also erased entire populations from the genetic record. For 400 years after 1200 BCE, the genome of this region goes almost completely silent. And when it comes back, the landscape is completely unrecognizable. Scientists call it the Iron Age gap. A stretch of centuries where ancient DNA samples from the southern Levant become almost impossible to find. The population did not disappear. People were living, dying, and being buried across this land during those 400 years. But the genetic record falls nearly silent, and the reason it falls silent is itself deeply disturbing. The Bronze Age collapse caused such a total disruption that the genetic continuity built up over thousands of years, the Canaanite foundation, was broken. New populations arrived, old ones were displaced or absorbed. The entire genetic picture of this region was reshuffled from the ground up. Then came the Assyrian Empire. In 722 BCE, the Assyrian king Sargon II conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. According to his own royal inscriptions, which still exist today, He deported 27,290 Israelites, scattered them across Mesopotamia and the lands of modern Iran. These are the origins of the famous 10 Lost Tribes narrative. But genetics shows this was not a mystical disappearance. It was forced migration. And forced migration means forced mixing. Those tribes did not vanish into thin air. When they dissolved into the surrounding populations of the ancient Near East, leaving only faint genetic echoes behind. Echoes that researchers today find in unexpected populations from Iraq to Afghanistan, entire peoples, entire lineages, with names, traditions, and languages, absorbed so completely that the only trace left of them is a tiny marker in a strand of DNA. The northern kingdom was gone, but the southern kingdom, Judah, survived. And when Babylon arrived to finish the job, what happened next would create one of the most remarkable genetic events in all of human history. 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem. The temple burns. The elite of Judah, the priests, the scholars, the craftsmen, are taken away to Babylon in chains. By every rule of ancient history, this should have been the end of Jewish genetic identity. Every other people absorbed into a larger empire simply blended in and disappeared over generations. But something different happened in Babylon. Facing the complete loss of their land, their temple, and their identity, Jewish communities in Babylon made a decision that would leave a permanent mark on the human genome. They stopped marrying outside the community, strictly, consistently, for generations. Geneticists call this endogamy, marrying within a defined group. And when a population practices strict endogamy for long enough, it creates what scientists call a founder effect. The genetic diversity of the group becomes compressed. Everyone in the community becomes more genetically similar to each other. A major ancient DNA study conducted by researchers from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and Harvard Medical School, published in the journal Cell, analyzed the genetics of Ashkenazi Jewish populations, the Jewish communities of Europe, in detail. Now, what they found was extraordinary. The majority of Ashkenazi Jews alive today, a community of approximately 10 million people, trace their maternal lineage back to a founding group of just a few hundred individuals who lived in medieval Europe. Those medieval Europeans themselves traced back to an even smaller founding group, one that originated in the ancient Near East, during or after the period of Babylonian exile. 10 million people. Descended from a founding group small enough to fit inside a single village. The Jewish people did not just preserve their scripture and their prayers in exile, they preserved their genome. The act of not intermarrying with surrounding populations for 2,500 years created a genetic signature so precise, so distinct, that a modern DNA test can identify it from a single cheek swab with remarkable accuracy. No other population on Earth has a genetic story quite like this one. When they returned from exile with their DNA intact, but the land they came back to was already occupied by people carrying the same ancient Canaanite root they themselves carried. And when the Roman Empire arrived centuries later and scattered the Jewish people across the world, the genetic story broke into dozens of separate threads, spreading from Spain to India to Ethiopia. One thread, however, remained almost impossibly intact, and it pointed straight back to a single man who may have lived 3,300 years ago, Haifa, Israel. Dr. Karl Skorecki is a kidney specialist and geneticist at Rambam Medical Center. He is also Jewish, and like many Jewish men, he carries the title of Cohen. A Cohen is a member of the Jewish priestly class, claiming direct patrilineal descent from Aaron, the brother of Moses, dating back over 3,300 years. One morning in synagogue, Dr. Skorecki was watching another Cohen lead the service. The man was from a completely different Jewish community, Sephardic, from the Middle East. Dr. Skorecki was Ashkenazi from Eastern Europe. Their families had been separated for over 1,000 years, and Dr. Skorecki had a thought. If both men really do descend from the same ancient Aaron, then their Y chromosomes should carry the same genetic signature. The Y chromosome passes from father to son, generation after generation, almost unchanged, so Dr. Skorecki ran the test. And the results changed population genetics forever. A specific pattern of Y chromosome markers, now known as the Cohen modal haplotype, appeared in 97 out of 106 Kohanim tested in the initial study. Kohanim from completely different countries, communities separated by oceans and centuries, Ashkenazi and Sephardic men who had never met. The probability of this happening by random chance, less than 1 in 10,000. Later work by Dr. Michael Thomas of University College London confirmed and extended these findings. Using a more detailed set of 12 Y chromosome markers, his team estimated that the common ancestral chromosome shared by today's Kohanim dates back to between 2,100 and 3,250 years ago, precisely the era when Aaron would have lived, according to biblical chronology. And the research did not stop there. The further population studies found that 46% of all Kohanim men globally carry the same Y chromosome group, haplogroup JP58, linking them to an ancient Near Eastern origin consistent with the ancient southern Levant. A genetic lineage, preserved across 3,000 years, through Babylonian exile, Roman conquest, the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, and the Holocaust, carried in the Y chromosomes of men who never stopped calling themselves priests. So this is one of the most extraordinary findings in the history of genetics. The idea that human tradition, passed down through family faith and practice, can be independently verified by science thousands of years later. Multiple religious traditions teach the importance of lineage and sacred ancestry. The scientific discovery of the Cohen modal haplotype is not a challenge to faith. It is a remarkable confirmation that human memory, when treated carefully, can survive across millennia. But now, with all of this in mind, the Canaanites, the exiles, the priestly bloodlines, it is time to look at the full picture, to place every modern population of this region on a single genetic map. And what that map shows is something no government, no news channel, and no history textbook has been willing to print clearly. Scientists have now collected enough ancient and modern DNA from the southern Levant to do something that was completely impossible 20 years ago. They can place modern Israeli Jews, Palestinian Arabs, Lebanese, Jordanians, and Druze all on the same genetic map, and measure the actual biological distance between them, not the political distance, not the religious distance, the DNA distance. In 2025, an ancient DNA survey of 93 skeletons from 9 sites across the southern Levant, conducted by teams from Israel, Jordan, and Harvard University, published its findings. The conclusion was direct. Modern Jewish and Arabic-speaking communities in this region typically derive at least 50% of their genomes from the same Bronze Age population, people who shared a common Canaanite culture and lived in this land thousands of years before any of the modern political or religious divisions existed. 50% from the same ancestors, people who are now on opposite sides of a wall. When geneticists plot modern Israelis and Palestinians together on a principal component analysis, a standard genetic comparison tool, the two groups sit so close together on the map that the distance between them is smaller than the distance between a Spanish person and a Portuguese person. Two neighboring countries in Western Europe, with no active military conflict, no separation wall, share no claims of incompatible ancestry, are genetically more different from each other than Israelis and Palestinians are. Professor Liran Carmel of Hebrew University, after completing his Canaanite DNA study, stated clearly, present-day inhabitants of the region are, to a large extent, descended from its ancient residents. All of them, not one group, all groups. And in September 2025, Harvard University published a statement from Professor David Reich addressing exactly this question. His lab's work, he explained, shows consistently that no modern population is genetically continuous from a single unbroken ancient source. The concept of a pure bloodline tied to an ancestral homeland does not hold up in the data. The science is not saying who is right or wrong in any human conflict, but it is saying something that cuts to the very heart of every claim made about this land. The genetic argument for exclusive ownership does not exist in the data. Yet there is something in the Islamic tradition that feels relevant here. The Quran says, "We have created you from a single pair and made you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another." Science, in its own language, is saying the same thing. The division is human, the connection is biological. But even this is not the deepest truth this land holds, because there is a discovery made in 2025 that pushes the clock back not 3,000 years, not 6,000 years, but 140,000 years. And it changes the meaning of everything we have talked about today. August 2025, published in Science Daily. Scientists announced the discovery of a 5-year-old child's fossil found in Skull Cave in the Carmel mountain range of northern Israel. The child lived 140,000 years ago, and its bones showed features of both modern Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. This is the oldest known evidence of interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals ever found, not in Europe, not in Asia, they in Israel. This child, buried in a cave in the same land that armies have fought over for 3 millennia, was proof that human mixing in this region did not begin with empires or migration waves or Bronze Age collapses. It began when our species barely existed in its modern form. The Neanderthal DNA that entered the human genome at Skull Cave 140,000 years ago did not disappear. It was passed down, generation after generation. And traces of it are still present today in the DNA of every non-African human being alive on Earth, including every person currently living in Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Jordan. The oldest resident of this land belongs to no tribe, no religion, no nation, no border. It is a child in a limestone cave, carrying 2 species inside its bones, who was the first to call this ground home. 140,000 years of continuous human presence on this land. 140,000 years of mixing, surviving, adapting, and leaving behind a genetic record that no war has ever been able to fully erase. And that brings us to the final question, the one this entire video has been building toward. If everyone in this region shares the same genetic root, going all the way back to a cave child 140,000 years ago, what does that mean for the question of who truly belongs here? We have traveled a long way in this video, from a 140,000-year-old child in a limestone cave through Canaanite city-states, the Babylonian exiles, Bronze Age collapses, European Philistines, and the unbroken Y chromosome of a 3,300-year-old priestly line. And we have arrived at a conclusion that no political speech will quote and no textbook will print. Every major genetic study, from Dr. Hilame's team at Tel Aviv University, to Professor David Reich's lab at Harvard, to Dr. Mark Haber's work at the Wellcome Sanger Institute in the UK, and to Professor Liran Carmel's research at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, all of them point to the same place. The modern populations of Israel and its neighbors are not separate peoples with separate origins. They are one ancient population, fractured by history and relabeled by politics. Professor David Reich said it plainly in 2025, virtually everyone came from somewhere else. No population is purely indigenous, no lineage is completely unbroken, no bloodline is unmixed. And the bones do not argue, the bones do not hold flags, the bones carry only one message, that every person standing on this ancient ground is, at some biological level, standing on the bones of someone they would call a stranger, but who is, in reality, a very distant cousin. This does not answer every question about this land. It does not resolve conflict or draw borders or tell people who is right. But it does answer one question with complete scientific certainty. Are these people connected? But yes, more deeply, more permanently, and more biologically than any of them have been told. Now, there is one final thread. There is a population whose ancient DNA has still not been fully sequenced. A group that sat at the crossroads of every single migration we discussed today, absorbing Canaanite farmers, Egyptian traders, Mesopotamian exiles, and Aegean sea peoples, all at once. A group whose genome, scientists believe, may hold the final key to understanding this entire region's genetic story. Their descendants are alive today. They do not know what their bones are carrying, and scientists, right now, are digging. That is the next thread, and we are already pulling it. If this video changed how you think about history, about ancestry, about identity, tell us in the comments. What was the moment that shocked you the most? And if you have not subscribed yet, this is your sign, because that next thread, it goes somewhere nobody is ready for.